that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise when he had turned on his bed. His fears had ever since been growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He had been saying to himself, "Oh, it is nothing but the wind in the chimney. It is a mouse crossing the floor. It's merely a cricket that has made a single chirp." Yes, he had been trying to comfort himself with these suspicions, but he found all in vain, because death, in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim. And it was now a mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he never saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. When I had waited a long time very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a little, very, very little crevice of the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, until at length a single dim ray, like the thread of a spider, shot out from the crevice and fell upon the vulture eye. It was open, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, a dull blue, with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow of my bones, but I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray, as if by instinct, precisely on the damned spot. And now, have I not told you of what you mistake for madness, but is but an over-acute sense of the hearing? Now I say, there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury, as the beating of the drum stimulates the soldier into courage. But even yet I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eye. Meantime the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker, and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say, louder every moment. Do you mark me well? Have I told you that I am nervous? So I am. And now the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of the old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to the uncontrollable terror. Yet for some minutes longer I refrained and stood still, but the beating grew louder. I thought the heart must burst, and now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once only. In an instant I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him, and then I smiled gaily, to find the deed so far done, but for many minutes the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. I knew it would not be heard for the war. At length it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon my heart and held it there for many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If you still think me mad, you would have think so no longer when I described the wise precaution I took for the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence. First of all I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head and the arms and the legs. I took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposed them all between the scantlings. And then I replaced the board so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatever. I had all been wary for that. A Talbot got it all. Ha ha! When I made an end of these labours, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what had I now to fear? There entered 3 men, who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbour during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police office, and they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled, for what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own, in a dream. The old man I mentioned was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house and bade them to search well. I then led them, at length, to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them here to rest of their fatigues, while I myself, in my wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath the reposed the corpse of my victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerfully, they chatted of familiar things, but ere long I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears, but still they sat and chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained definiteness, until at length I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt I grew very pale, but I talked more fluently and with a heightened voice. Yet the sound increased. What could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much the sound makes when a watch enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. They talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I aroused and argued with trifles in a high key, in violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to the fury of observations of the men. But the noise steadily increased. What could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting, and grated it upon the boards. But the noise arose all over and continued, increased. It grew louder, louder, louder. And when still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible that they heard not? Almighty God, no, no, they heard, they suspected, they knew! They were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think. But anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this desertion. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die, and now again, hark! Louder, louder, louder! Villains! I shrieked. Dissemble no more! I admit the deed! Tear out the planks! Here, here! It is the beating of his hideous heart!